Hello and welcome. Great to have you with us. This week we saw a really significant announcement land. The UK government, through the 2025 Strategic Defense Review, has committed to building up to 12 brand new nuclear-powered attack submarines. It's a massive decision, a huge bet really, decades in the making. And, it comes with some pretty eye-watering price tags already attached even before the first bit of steel gets cut. So today we're diving deep into the source material you've likely seen flying around the reports, the analysis, including some key insights that popped up on Westferry Times. We want to unpack this decision. What kind of submarines are we actually talking about here? Why this number up to 12? How does it all fit into Britain's, bigger strategic picture? And crucially, what are the real challenges down the road? And to help us navigate all this material and really surface the key insights, we're joined today by Dr. James Whitaker from the Royal United Services Institute, RUSI. Thanks for joining us to guide us through this.
It's my pleasure. There's certainly a lot to get into here.
Absolutely. So let's start with that headline number, up to 12. The sources really highlight this figure. Where does that target actually come from? What's the thinking?
Right. Well, the 12, it really represents the Royal Navy's ambition for operational availability.
Yeah.
The current fleet is 7 Astute-class boats. Initially, the plan or thinking might have been for maybe 9 replacements. But the thing is, with the real-world limits of maintenance cycles, training, getting crews ready, 7 hulls means you can realistically sustain maybe, just maybe, 1 submarine on patrol at any given time. Consistently, anyway.
Just one?
Yeah. 12, especially when you factor in some of the new tech we'll probably talk about, that gets you towards being able to reliably keep 2 submarines forward deployed. 2 operational at the same time.
Ah, okay.
It's really about restoring that sort of continuous presence in key areas.
So it's not just let's have more boats. It's fundamentally about changing the operational rhythm, the reach of the fleet.
That's exactly it. It's the number they figure they need to shift from a pretty minimal presence to something, more strategically useful. It allows for deployment in multiple areas at once.
Right. And just so we're absolutely clear for everyone listening, these are attack submarines, SSNs, conventionally armed. They're not the ones carrying the UK's nuclear deterrent missiles.
Correct. Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
These are the hunters, the intelligence gatherers. They carry things like Tomahawk cruise missiles for precision strikes. And the nuclear power source is key, though it gives them incredible endurance, speed, lets them stay submerged and operate globally for, potentially decades without needing to refuel or even surface often.
And speaking of the costs involved, the sources are already pointing to some pretty massive upfront financial commitments, aren't they?
They certainly are. If you look back to January, Rolls-Royce finalized the deal worth around $9 billion. That's for the reactors for these new boats.
$9 billion just for the reactors.
Just for the reactors.
Yeah.
And now BAE Systems has secured the design contract. That one's valued at £4 billion, and it's set to run through 2028.
Okay, so add those up. We're already looking at something like, 13 billion pounds? Committed by the Treasury before the first boat is even really under construction? That feels like a pretty strong signal.
It is a very strong signal of intent. It helps de-risk some key components, those long lead items, and the initial design phases. It shows political backing, and, it also locks in that critical industrial capacity early on.
Okay, right. Let's get into the boats themselves then. What are they actually planning to build? Based on the design info floating around in the sources, can you give us a picture of these SSN Asoki-S boats? Size, tech, crew?
Sure. The design suggests a boat that's significantly larger than the current Astute class. We're talking around 97 meters long, displacing something like 11,000 tons when submerged.
Bigger than Astute.
Definitely bigger. And they'll carry a slightly larger crew as well, expected to be somewhere in the 120 to 130 range.
Yeah.
And that reactor you mentioned, the Rolls-Royce PWR-3, it plays a pretty crucial part in making that 12-hull ambition feasible, doesn't it?
Oh, absolutely fundamental. The PWR-3 is a brand new design. Its key feature really is its lifespan. It's designed to power the boat for its entire service life. Think about 33 years without needing refueling.
Wow. No refueling for 33 years.
Exactly. That eliminates a massive, complex, and time-consuming maintenance period that older reactors require. It frees up a huge amount of operational time per boat, making that larger fleet size much more sustainable in practice.
That longevity, yeah, that sounds like a game changer for fleet availability.
Yeah.
You mentioned Tomahawks earlier, but the sources say there's a new weapon system capability plan too, something new for UK subs.
Yes, that's right. A first for a British SSN. a dedicated vertical launch system, or VLS. The designs show 6 to 8 tubes specifically for launching missiles vertically.
Okay.
And crucially, these are being designed to be compatible with the U.S. MK-41 standard interface.
Right. The MK-41, why is that compatibility such a big deal?
Well, it's really about two things: interoperability with allies, mainly the U.S., and future-proofing the platform. Initially, they'll almost certainly carry the latest Tomahawk variant, the Block V, but using that standard U.S. interface means these boats could potentially integrate future weapons systems developed by the U.S. or other allies.
Like what kind of systems?
Could be new types of strike missiles, potentially even hypersonic weapons down the line, without needing hugely expensive redesigns later on. It offers, significant strategic flexibility.
Okay. And what about finding things out there in the ocean? What are the sources saying about sensors, stealth features?
Well, they're set to feature an all-new photonics mast integrated into the sail. It's a big step up from the traditional optical periscope, gives you much better visual and electronic surveillance capabilities.
Photonics, right.
And the main sonar system will be an evolution of the excellent Type 2076 system that's on the Astute class, but reportedly with around 30% more processing power. So it's smarter and more capable. Another interesting detail that's emerged is the plan to adopt X-shaped rudders at the stern.
X-rudders. What's the advantage of that configuration?
The X shape gives you better maneuverability, especially in sort of confined waters. But perhaps more importantly, it's also intended to reduce the submarine's acoustic signature. Helps make the boat quieter, harder for adversaries to detect. It's all about stealth.
Quieter and more agile. Okay, let's pull back a bit and connect this to the bigger picture. The name itself, SSN AUKUS, is pretty explicit. How does this UK build program fit into that whole trilateral security pact with the US and Australia?
Yeah, it's absolutely central to AUKUS's, specifically what they call Pillar 1. It's primarily a UK design, but it incorporates significant US technology, especially around things like the combat system, weapon systems, and some key sensors. And importantly, Australia is committed to building at least 5 of these same SSN AUKUS boats in their own shipyards down the line. So it becomes a genuinely shared platform between the UK and Australia.
And Australia isn't just waiting to build their own. The sources say they're actively investing now in the design and the initial build phases happening here in the UK.
That's right, absolutely. Australia has committed frankly, enormous amount, $368 billion over 30 years to their whole submarine program. And a pretty substantial chunk of that early money, around $2.4 billion, is flowing directly into UK industry. Places like BAE Systems in Barrow, Rolls-Royce, and Derby.
So they're putting money into UK yards now.
Yes, it's a significant financial commitment from Canberra that directly supports British jobs and industry right at the start.
And the AUK's agreement also includes plans for US and UK submarines to start rotating through HMAS Sterling in Western Australia, starting from 2027, doesn't it? So even before the first SSN AUKUS hits the water, the Royal Navy will be operating more routinely in the Indo-Pacific.
Precisely. That rotational presence, they call it Submarine Rotational Force West, or SRF West, is a really crucial interim step. It builds up expertise, improves that interoperability between the three navies, and provides a tangible allied military presence in the Indo-Pacific much sooner than waiting for the brand new boats, which won't arrive until well into the 2030s, probably later.
Right, gets things moving faster. Okay, let's talk about the impact here in the UK. Building submarines, especially nuclear ones, on this scale is a huge industrial undertaking. What do the sources indicate about the economic side, the jobs impact?
It's projected to be very significant. Just looking at Rolls-Royce's reactor work, that alone is expected to safeguard around 5,000 jobs,
Yeah.
many highly skilled. BAE Systems up in Barrow and Furness, where the hulls are built, they're looking at sustaining potentially up to 10,000 roles directly involved in construction.
And that's just the main players, isn't it? There's always a big supply chain ripple effect with these programs.
Exactly. You have to think about things like the new Rolls-Royce Nuclear Skills Academy being set up in Derby that's aiming to train 200 apprentices a year, specifically for this kind of complex nuclear work. And the supply chain, it extends right across the country. Hundreds of smaller companies providing specialized components, materials, engineering services. The Treasury itself put out analysis suggesting a GDP multiplier of about 1.8, meaning for every pound the government spends on the program, the idea is it could generate about £1.80 in wider economic activity through that supply chain and associated spending.
Right. And this kind of massive long-term project, it also seems pretty central to those broader debates we hear about defense spending levels, doesn't it? Keir Starmer recently reiterated Labour's commitment to get to 2.5% of GDP on defense, aiming for 3%. Investments like this are kind of baked into reaching those targets.
They absolutely are. Large, complex, multi-decade procurement programs like SSNAQs form the backbone of achieving and sustaining those higher defense spending percentages. It's not just a budget line. It's a long-term investment in strategic capability and the industrial base required to deliver it.
Okay, let's zoom out again to the strategic why. Why is Britain making such a huge long-term bet on nuclear attack submarines right now? According to the Defense Review, what are the threats driving this?
Well, the Strategic Defense Review itself is pretty explicit on this. It clearly identifies Russia as the acute threat, and it specifically notes increased activity by increasingly sophisticated Russian submarines in the North Atlantic and up the Arctic. That's a primary focus.
Okay, Russia, the acute threat.
And then China is labeled the systemic challenge or systemic threat,
Yeah.
the need to contribute to deterrence, stability in the Indo-Pacific. Alongside allies like the U.S. and Australia, there's clearly a fundamental driver behind the AUKUS pact itself and therefore the SSN AUKUS build. So it's really a dual focus, different challenges in different key regions.
And how does getting up to 12 hulls specifically allow the Royal Navy to tackle both that acute Russian threat closer to home and the systemic challenge further away in the Indo-Pacific at the same time?
Well, with the current fleet of 7, you're constantly juggling very limited resources. You might, as we said, have one boat actually on patrol, while others are in transit between areas or undergoing essential training or stuck in deep maintenance cycles. It's a real stretch.
Right.
With 12 boats assuming, and it's a big assumption, they achieve that number and the improved operational tempo that the new PWR-3 reactor enables you gain the capacity, the sheer numbers, to potentially maintain persistent patrols in both the North Atlantic and east of Suez, maybe the Indo-Pacific. And you can do that while still having enough boats back in the cycle in the UK for essential maintenance, crew certification, and training. It gives you strategic depth and flexibility you just don't have now.
But building these things, especially nuclear submarines, is notoriously difficult, expensive, and often runs late, doesn't it? Your sources must touch on the risks involved. What are the main challenges facing this huge project? We've seen issues crop up before, things like workforce skills, reactor core manufacturing, even cost overruns on parts of the Dreadnought deterrent submarine program.
Oh yes, the challenges are very real, and the sources acknowledge them. The perennial issues are always, first, the workforce finding and retaining enough people with those highly specialized skills, like nuclear-certified welders, specialist engineers. That's a constant struggle. Then there's the supply chain, ensuring hundreds of suppliers deliver complex parts on time and to quality, and just managing cost and schedule over decades with inflation and unforeseen technical hurdles. Specifically for SSN AUKUS, there's that added complexity of integrating very sensitive U.S. technology, which involves navigating sometimes tricky U.S. export control regulations like ITAR.
Okay, so workforce, supply chain, cost, schedule, tech integration. Quite a list. But the sources also mention steps being taken to try and mitigate these risks.
They do. For instance, that large upfront £4 billion design contract we mentioned earlier, that's specifically intended to tackle potential technical roadblocks and integrate those complex U.S. systems much earlier in the design process, hopefully avoiding some issues that might have cropped up later on previous programs. Also, having Australian engineers physically embedded in the UK design teams in Barrow right from the start helps share the workload, builds a common understanding across the partners, and anticipates future Australian build requirements.
So while the challenges are definitely there are active efforts to get ahead of them this time.
That seems to be the plan, yes. Learning lessons from past programs.
Okay, so realistically, what kind of timeline are we looking at? When might we actually see the first of these SSN AUKUS boats entering service with the Royal Navy?
Well, the perhaps initial aspiration might have been for the late 2030s. But, given the sheer scale, the complexity involved, the integration challenges, a more realistic expectation based on historical patterns with these kinds of mega projects is probably closer to 2039 or perhaps even the early 2040s for that first boat to actually enter operational service.
Early 2040s.
Potentially. But even with that kind of timeline, it should still hopefully come online before the costs of trying to extend the life of the current Astute-class submarines become completely prohibitive. There's a balancing act there.
Well, this has been a really fascinating deep dive into the sources. Thank you. Just to sort of wrap things up, drawing on all that material, including the reporting from Westferry Times and the other analysis out there, what's your kind of concluding perspective on the significance of this whole project?
I think what really stands out is just the sheer scale and the truly generational nature of this commitment. It feels like like Britain is consciously trying to rebuild a certain kind of strategic industrial muscle, perhaps one that's atrophied a bit. And within that defense posture, the nuclear submarine remains the absolute apex capability. It's the platform that allows you to hide, to hunt adversaries, and to project power covertly anywhere in the world. This huge SSNI-UCAS project really underscores the enduring, perhaps even growing importance of that undersea domain for the UK's security and global influence.
That ability to hide, hunt, and hurt. Yeah, that's a powerful summary of the submarine's unique role, isn't it? This deep dive, looking at sources like Westferry Times and others, it really does illuminate the sheer scale of Britain's strategic ambitions here and the immense industrial effort that's going to be required to actually meet them. So, as you listening reflect on all of this, here's something perhaps to consider. Given this decades-long commitment, the vast resources involved in building up to 12 of these incredibly complex nuclear attack submarines, what fundamental shift might this huge bet signal about the future threats Britain anticipates, and perhaps its intended role in global security for the next half-century? It's definitely a long-term vision playing out, deep beneath the waves. Thank you so much for guiding us through that complex picture.
My pleasure entirely.
And thank you all for joining us for this deep dive. We hope you found it thought-provoking. Until next time, goodbye.